Welcome to the Speaking Podcast. You can find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com. I'm also on BitChute and YouTube as Speaking Podcast. I also have the Awakening Podcast, the Learn Polish Podcast, the Meditation Podcast, and the Crypto Podcast, and all can be found on roycollin.com. Today, my guest, please welcome Rick Chromey.
Well, it's good to be here, my friend. Thank you for having me.
Oh, looking forward to it. So I always like to know, you might let the listeners know, who's Rick?
Who is Rick? Well, Rick is a lot of things, but I pretty much I like to bill myself as a cultural explorer. I do a lot of sociological history. I've been trained in historical analysis and such, and cultural analysis. So that's probably where my starting point is. But I'm a professor. I've taught in the area of in my area, Christian education, church ministry is kind of the focal area where I've concentrated, but I do a lot of teaching and training and speaking, and I've written over a dozen books, including my recent book, Gen Tech, on the American story of who we are and technology and change. And it's a fun little book. I've enjoyed writing it and looking forward to promoting it now.
So 12, that's impressive.
Well, I books are kind of like babies. You just you write one and you think, well, I got another one I got to write. So you put that out there. And, the hard part today is just getting a publisher. We're talking about speaking, and I got to tell you, a lot of people want to speak today, especially professionally. And the key to speaking professionally is to have a writing component to you, because if you're not writing and publishing, that's where people read you and get your bigger, broader thoughts, and then they bring you in to speak to their audience and such. So you've got to have a really good or willingness and desire to be a writer as well today, not just a speaker.
And like with your bio, because I know from just researching your website, you've got kind of a nice bio that people can use. Not everybody does that, but I'm sure you found, because I know you've spoken in all 50 states, that must have helped you.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's just from I've moved around a lot in my life. A lot of my schooling was in different places, and I've just been blessed. I got to tell you, I was thinking about this the other day. I have been to every state. I've been all over. I've been in Europe and Africa and Mexico and various parts. I'm still looking to go more towards Asia and Russia now. I mean, there's a lot of places I'd like to go, but and I was in Sweden and Italy here a couple of years ago. So I mean, I just kind of blessed, and that's what's cool about the speaking life is when you get to that level where people will pay for you to come, and then you can kind of make arrangements. Like I'm working on something right now with a school down in Barbados next February, and they need a professor to come down and speak. And I always tell people, if you want to set yourself up for success, you've got to think about the foundation stones, and your foundation stones that get you the open doors everywhere are your education and your experience. The more education you have, the more experience. They work in tandem. So for me, that's part of the reason I became a doctor. I pursued a doctorate was because I got to the point in my experience where it was limiting the doorways. And so I would just kind of gradually get further. And for me, I did a master's work for the same reason, and then graduate work and eventually the doctoral work. And, what's funny is that once you get past those doors, the world's wide open to you. It's amazing what is available to you when you've got higher education working in tandem with great experience. And so that's literally how I write. People say, what do you write about? I write about my experiences. And then I talk about my experiences. I've got stories all over the world now that really kind of inform my speaking life. And it makes training fun. It makes the speaking life fun.
No, excellent. So I always like to ask speakers, especially because most of them say, I've spoken 48 states, except for Alaska and Hawaii. You've spoken 50, so you've obviously done them too as well. What have you learned about the difference between the different states? And then following up from that, then you might say when you've gone to the different continents.
Wow. Well, the states are definitely, every location is different. I live in the Pacific Northwest. I'm from Montana originally, which is a very low population state. And I grew up in central Montana in a very small town. I think that's part of the reason why I wanted to just get out and see the world. I wanted to experience life, and I wanted to see what this great big world was like. Instead of watching it through a television, I thought, hey, let's do it. And for me, I thought, the best way to do that was to figure out a gig where people would actually get you to come and they would pay your way. And
So I know that you've spoke in 50 states, and like a lot of people, they speak in 48 without Alaska, without Hawaii. So you've done all. So you might let me know the difference in how you adjust, and also when you're speaking internationally in the different continents.
yeah, every state obviously is going to be different, and there are peculiarities. For me, I love the travel component of each one of the states. There, for example, like Alaska, that was an incredible opportunity. I was speaking up there I was doing a training for an organization. That's the other thing to think about. A lot of people don't realize there are organizations out there that when you get good enough and you have the qualifications, they will hire you to go and speak on their behalf. And I did that for like 15 years for an organization and loved it. And they sent me up to Alaska, Anchorage, as I recall. And it was, I think it was March, but it could have been February. All I know is it was 20 below, and the sun came up about 10 o'clock in the morning and went down about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it was dark most of the time I was there. I remember moose walking around the downtown Anchorage area. It was really wild. But the funny part about that, or the irony is, and this is the beautiful part about the speaking life, is you get opportunities to do things you never would have imagined. For example, to take an airplane trip over the Alaskan wilderness in a little small airplane would cost you hundreds of dollars. Well, it just so happens that the week before I was in Kansas City, and I was speaking at a conference there, and I walked into this big room where they were just doing some community building, and people were talking, and I sat down at this table, and across from me was a lady who was from Alaska. And when I got talking with her, she was from Anchorage, Alaska. And when I was talking with her even more, she was from the organization that was bringing me in. And so I started chatting with her, and she said, "Hey, would you like to take an airplane ride next week when you come up?" I said, "Well, yeah. What are you thinking?" She says, "Well, I've got a friend who has a small airplane, and they will take you on an airplane ride. They'd love to do that." I said, "Well, yeah." So yeah, I spent 2 hours in a little small 4-seat airplane flying over the glaciers of Alaska, which was an amazing experience just to do that. That never would have happened except for the fact I was in Kansas City one weekend and I was in Alaska the next weekend, and the worlds collided. I've had some amazing, I was in Detroit. I remember one time I was speaking in Detroit, and it just happened to be the very last weekend. And I'm a huge baseball fan, so you have to understand, I love baseball. It was the last weekend that old Tiger Stadium was in operation. They were moving to a new stadium the next year. And Tiger Stadium has some amazing history to it. And I just wanted to go. And I was able to get in there with my host. You just have hosts. And this is the beautiful part about professional speaking, is that when you're host, they want to serve you. They want to share with you their local community. So they're constantly open to that. And, I'm headed to Iowa this week, and on the docket is to see where Buddy Holly was killed in 1959. I'm a rock and roll guy. And so I thought, hey, that'd be fun. So my host was saying, what would you like to see in Iowa? And I've been all over Iowa anyway, but we're in a part of the woods where Buddy Holly was killed, and the Big Bopper and Richie Valens, they all went down in an airplane crash in 1959. I thought, hey, I'd like to see that. So that's on the docket this week. But I've got Houston coming up. I've got Montana coming up. I've got, let's see what else, Minnesota coming up. So those are all just in the next several weeks. It's a fun life.
See, I love that, because a lot of people, they kind of live out of the suitcase and they're going, oh, I don't know what city I'm in now, I'm waking up. But you're making sure when you're going somewhere, you're doing it for a reason. You want to actually explore where you're going, and so you've the added advantage. All the costs are covered, so it makes so much sense. I think that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is one of the problems with professional speaking today. And I've had a few mentors in my life, and even a few that have suggested that you go for the one and out. You go big and then you go home type of thing, and you do that enough, you're going to be able to make a living at it. I don't operate that way. I operate for the comeback. My goal is I want to get out. I just booked a date for a little church. I speak at churches still, and there was a little church that wanted a training. They couldn't afford much, but the weekend was right for me, and it just worked out in Evanston, Wyoming. Okay, Evanston is just a little podunk town, and to have a speaker come in and do what I do for them is just it's going to be a big event for this church and for this community and such, and we're going to have some fun at it. But I just remain open, and the whole point is I work for the comeback. If I do well, then people will invite me back. In fact, the whole reason I'm going back to Iowa this week to speak for a whole week is because I spoke for the same guy when he was down in New Mexico, which, by the way, was my 50th state. I had the only two states I had not gotten yet were Hawaii and New Mexico, and I got them within a month of each other, or 2 months of each other. We went to Hawaii, and then New Mexico was my last date. So I still have a rock. I brought a rock back from New Mexico. I hope it was legal to do that, but I did bring a rock back. And I wrote on it number 50 and the date that I was there. That was my 50th state. So from New Mexico.
No problem.
But yeah, work for the comeback. I mean, a lot of people want to know, how do you speak? I say you do it one step at a time, and you work from a way of having them have you come back. You give your best stuff, but you still have more in the pocket. I always leave them wanting more.
Excellent. And you're involved with an organization. Is it MANA or something like that?
MANA.
Yeah. Well, you might tell me what that's about, because I think it's very important. I know you're preaching as well, but I think it's very important when you've the ability to speak, getting involved in different organizations. So I'd love to know what that entails, what's it about. Right.
Well, MANA Educational Services International is a faith-based organization I started in 2017. And MANA itself is an interesting word. And for those of you who are religiously inclined and biblically inclined, this is very interesting, I'm sure. But the word manna to me caught my attention because it's Hebrew. In the Hebrew, the Old Testament language was written in Hebrew. The word manna, and manna was the bread. For those who aren't aware, aren't up to the story of what's happening with manna. In the Old Testament, there was a time where the Israelites were wandering in the desert, and God fed them quail, and he also fed them bread, this bread-like substance that was called manna. And when you look at the word manna, it literally means, what is it? And I love that idea. When they gathered up this, near as we can tell, this white stuff on the ground every day, and they looked at it, they went, manna. What is it? What is this stuff? I don't get this stuff. And that became its name. It literally, the word manna means, what is it? And I thought, what a great name for an educational organization. Because for me, it's about creating divine curiosity, if you will. It's about inspiring people to be curious about their lives, to be curious about information. We live in a culture right now that wants to put a period on every single thing we do. You look at the narratives that we have that divide us so much as a culture. They're all periods. They all say, if you don't believe it this way, then you're out. If you don't go this way, you're out. We create these boxes, these periods, and I go, that's not education. Those of us who've been trained in higher education, one of the things we learn is how the world opens up. There are more question marks at the end of an education than there are periods. In fact, I always thought it was interesting that in high school, what we do is we have them go through classes, and we call them class periods, right? Class periods. We're always putting periods on their learning, when in reality, what we want to do is create question marks. And for me, the question marks, I've always been curious, and MANA Educational Services International is a curious company. We want to create curiosity. We want people to be inspired. We want to create ideas. We want to create insight that you're not going to get in other places. Now, just recognize that's my faith-based arm. So, that a lot of the stuff I do out of that comes, in my involvement with the church and stuff. But my other side, which is Gentech, my latest book is I do a lot of work also with public services. I'm speaking here in August to the Boise Chamber of Commerce, which is one of my biggest dates this year. I'm on their speaker series downtown. Well, I'm not going to be mentioning anything about religion or church or anything there, but it's a great opportunity to talk about technology, generations, and such. And so I have my rickchromey.com is my other website, which is where I would drive most people in a conversation like this. That's my speaking website. And, if you're interested in faith-based, that's good too. But I have those two arms because that's who I am.
Like with the Chamber of Commerce, I think it's good to land that way. Are you a member of the chamber, or you've just got the invite as a speaker? Are you actually a member of any chamber?
I am a member of the local Chamber of Commerce. Yes. And to give credit where credit is due, a year ago, I decided to do something really crazy. I had a little bit of extra money with this new book, and I thought, well, I really need to figure out a way to promote it, because the publishers today, if you write a book, publishers will not promote your book. In the old days, it was they really promoted it well, and you had it was a whole different thing. Today, they expect the authors to do all the promotion work. In fact, you can't get a book deal unless you have a platform of a lot of people. They look at your platforms. They look at how many people follow you on Twitter, how many people are your Facebook friends, how many are subscribing to your YouTube channels, your podcasts. So you've got to have a platform in order to get a book deal today. And that's increasingly difficult. And with Gentech, I took a leap of faith and went to a publisher that has a history of landing books on the New York Times bestseller list. And they're a small publisher. They work with you, and it's a little bit different type of a gig there. But I invested some money because I really believed in this title, and I wanted to get outside the church market on this particular topic. I just wanted to broaden my horizons a bit. And so I hired a publicist. That's where I was going with this story. I hired a publicist about 18 months ago, and she came in, and one of the things that she did was she was working all the local angles, and I never saw those before. And she was working these angles really well. And one of the things she did was she got me connected to the Chamber of Commerce. And from there, she kept pushing me to the chamber. They have this, what they call speaker series that they do. And she kept pushing me to the chamber. And eventually she got them to say yes. Hopefully they'll be glad they said yes in the end. I believe they will. But it's a big thing, because the people that speak for this particular series are the CEOs, the very high end, people who've got a little bit of more of a name than Rick Chromey does. Let's just put it that way. And it'll be interesting to see how it all works out. But I'm excited, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to give my best, and I'm working for that comeback. The goal here, actually, the goal on this one is to get in there, do a good enough job that some of the local businesses, some of the local organizations will start using me for their employee training, because that's where the money is. Corporate training is where the money's at in speaking.
I mean, there's also the advantage as well as when you're surrounded by the CEOs, sometimes they could just decide if they like what you're talking about, they might just buy the book for all their employees. It's not much money for them, but to you, it could be, 100,000 employees, and you have that advantage.
Right. And that's the whole point here is your speaking opens up doors for your writing then to be sold. But then your writing then opens up doors because people, I just found out about a book club over in Portland. I have a sister-in-law who she wanted to, they had this little book club. And so she said, why don't we do my brother-in-law's book? And so she did. And they did my new Gentech book. And they all talked about it. Well, you don't know if the right person reads your book, that it might be what opens up your career path to CNN or or Fox or MSNBC or any of those cable channel news where you become a commentator. I mean, this particular podcast could do that. The right person listening with the right message, everything's there. Next thing you know, you're doing stuff that you never imagined. So for me, I call it fishing. I'm constantly fishing. I'm constantly, you just happen to be the guy today that I'm enjoying the conversation with. And that's what it's all about.
And of the 12 books, were they all through publish, or did you self-publish any?
And that's a great question. Let me see. I'm going to count right now. I think Gentech is my 5th or 6th published book, nationally published book. So the rest of them were all self-published books. I like self-publishing better, to be honest, because you make a lot more money at it, and you can also control it. You can give it away if you want, and it's digital versions, and and you can write about what you want. And for what? Let me give you an idea here for your listeners. One of the things that I did several years ago was I took every one of my workshops, my popular workshops. You find out it's just like a musician. You play your music, and there are certain songs that people resonate with, they want to listen to, and they attend, they like the concerts and such. Well, the same thing with writing. There are just certain topics that just kind of, people are attracted to. I have a workshop called Why Kids Really Misbehave. It's for parents, it's for teachers, it's for caregivers, anybody who works with kids. Why kids really misbehave. And so I just wrote a book about it. I couldn't get a publisher to take it on. I tried a few publishers to see, but couldn't get any publisher to take it. Didn't matter. I wrote a book. And now when I do the workshop, I just say, listen, for a $5 donation to my organization, it's a download, So, and most people, well, I'll give $5 to your organization to get a download of Why Kids Really Misbehave. And so that's how I work. All my digital works are really just downloads. I also have written some inspirational works. There's writing that doesn't really fit a publisher that I like to do, and so I'm constantly finding new ways of. I write every day something. So yeah. So self-publishing, about half of them are self-published.
Okay, brilliant. And like you're talking about the workshops, because that's something that I like to kind of ask about as well, because how you structure it and everything. So, and I'm curious, why do kids really misbehave? So you might kind of go into how you structure the workshop for something like that. Right.
Well, why kids really misbehave is a great example of that. There's something I learned a long time ago. In fact, it came out of a class, a communications class I was taking. And this one just happened to be a preaching class where my professor was telling us that the secrets to a great sermon, as he put it, was first I reads myself full, then I thinks myself clear, then I pray myself hot, and then I let myself go. And that's really, I actually built an entire workshop around that phrase. I call it teaching with power, the 4 components of a great lesson. But when you think about building a workshop, what you want to do first of all is you want to be very prepared. You want to have you've got to know your stuff. And Why Kids Really Misbehave emerged because I was teaching classroom management for years. And I was just looking, there's all these different ways, and of how you manage a classroom, how do you motivate kids and keep them behaving, and do you gimmick them, do you guilt them, do you naturally motivate them, all sorts of things. So, one of the big questions that kept coming up was, well, why do they really misbehave? And I got thinking about, why do they really misbehave? And that's when I started to think about it. See, I had already prepared heavily by researching it. Now I began to think about, okay, why do kids misbehave? And one of the things that you learn in speaking, and I learned this actually from Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was a master communicator because he used triads in his speaking, and master communicators always use trios or triads or threes. Speak in threes, 3 points, 3 principles, 3 possibilities, 3 options, three goals. And then you want to try and make it easy. So when it came down to why kids misbehave, what are 3 reasons why kids misbehave? And by the way, the reason for 3 is simple. If you just give 2, the mind kind of stops at 2 and goes, what's 3? What's 3? And naturally, our mind naturally thinks in 3s. A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, red, yellow, green. We just think in 3s. So if your mind doesn't get that 3rd point, it just jumbles, it stops. On the other hand, once you go past 3, if you go to 4, 5, 6, you start to bore the mind. So 3 is the perfect number. Land on 3. That's why baseball is such a great sport. It's all about 3s, 3 bases, 3 basemen, 3 outs, 9 innings is 3 cubed. I mean, it's all about
3 strikes.
All about 3 strikes. Yeah. 4 balls, that makes no sense, but it should be 3 balls and you're done. No, but baseball, that's why I like baseball, but 3s. So when I thought about why kids misbehave, what are 3 reasons why kids misbehave? And then how can I make them easy to remember? And one of the ways you make things easy in speaking, and it's not for your audience always, it's for you. How do you remember it so you can communicate it over and over and over again? Well, the 3 reasons I came up with was belonging issues. They don't feel like they're fitting in. 2, boredom issues. They're just bored. That's why they're misbehaving. Or 3, beliefs. They kind of believe some things about themselves, that they're bad kids or whatever. And so those 3 reasons became a book. Those 3 reasons became a workshop. So as you structure then the workshop, what you do is once you get those 3 points in place, you then go back and you've got to think about, how do I create emotion? Now with this one, it's not hard. Most of us have had troubled kids, or we've had, maybe we've got some misbehavior going on right now in the home or in the classroom or with someone that we're taking care of. And we're just out of, we're just out of options. That's why a lot of people come to my workshop. They want to know what's the answer to this one. And they're always surprised when I tell them, well, it's beliefs. What they believe, what they believe about themselves drives a lot of their misbehavior, or it's boredom. Truth is, you've actually created an environment where you've bored them. You mean it's my fault? Yeah. A lot of teachers, the reason why you have misbehavior in the classroom is because you're boring them. There's a reason why kids act up on that big long road trip across the country, and they're constantly asking every 5 minutes, "Are we there yet?" They're bored. They run, and boredom is really simple. By the way, this is a great communication tip for you. Boredom equals age. So if you're speaking to young children, you got to think their age. If you have a 5-year-old, you have a 5-minute attention span. If you have a 10-year-old, you have a 10-minute attention span. If you have somebody 16 years and older, you have a 4-minute attention span. And a lot of that comes back to micromedia. In today's culture, because of YouTube, the average YouTube video is 4 minutes. But because of micromedia like Twitter or Snapchat, those type of micromedia where everything's really short, short conversations, short communications, we've literally, if you've been immersed in social media, we have a very short attention span today. The only exception that we're finding to that are podcasts. Podcasts can actually be somewhat long if there's entertainment, which, let me give one last piece and then we'll go back and see what you have any other questions. But one other piece here is, if you're building a great workshop, I think in 4-minute chunks now. Every 4 minutes, I want to say something and then I want to switch. Maybe I talk for 4 minutes and then I show a video for a few minutes. And then I come back and we have a conversation for 4 minutes where I put them into small groups or pair shares or something like that. And then we come back and we do an experience for 4 minutes. Everything's 4-minute chunks, and you just keep moving that through. And that's what keeps people interested, keeps them engaged, and keeps them wanting more.
And you're dead right, because I've noticed TikTok, it's kind of, you've got 2 options, 15 seconds or a minute, and you can get addicted to it because it's like, yeah, it's only a minute. And people keep engaged because if someone is given a message in a minute, there's no waffle. They're just getting to the point. And
right.
by listening, if they're good, because there's some very good stuff on, you can stop all these kind of silly dances and everything, but there's actually some very good information on TikTok. And, you'll find hours missing when you think you're only going to go in for 5 or 10 minutes, but because it's precise and entertaining. There's no one falling asleep, getting bored.
We used to call it the elevator speech. Can you communicate who you are in 30 seconds or less? And then get them wanting more, get them asking questions.
So I see you're a Toastmaster as well. How did you get into that? Was that kind of early that you got your speaking journey with the Toastmasters, or how did that come about?
I didn't think I needed Toastmasters because I've been speaking since I was 18 years old. The first time I got paid to speak, I was 18 years old. Nice. So I've been doing this a long, long time. And I didn't think there was anything Toastmasters could teach me until I went to, I was executive director of an organization here in Boise, and we just happened to host a Toastmasters club at our building. And I thought, being the executive director, I'll at least pop in and see what this little organization is about. I knew that they were a speaking club, and I thought it'd be good to check it out. Well, I get there and I sit down and I go, the meeting's fine. It's good. It's kind of small, as I recall. But we get down to the end and they have what they call table topics. And they asked me a question and I had to stand up and speak impromptu for 2 minutes. Normally, that's not a problem. But for some reason, and I've had these moments previous to Toastmasters, I would get so nervous, my heart would just go boom, 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 boom. I was just, wow. And I don't know what it is, because I've spoke for thousands of people before. I can walk out on a stage and literally speak and not have that feeling, but I can be in a small group. I think it's the vulnerability of it all, where I'm just, my heart was just pounding. So I stood up and I had 2 minutes. I spoke maybe 30 seconds. They had a 30-second minimum that day. I spoke maybe for 30 seconds. And I said, and I had double clutches to the max. I think when they have what they call an grammarian there at Toastmasters who counts all those ums, and double clutches. We called them verbal graffiti in that particular club. And when we got done and she counted up, she said, you spoke for 33 seconds and you had 35 ums, and double clutches.
How did you manage that?
I went, wow. And I immediately said, how much does it cost? So I thought, this is simple. It's in my building. Let's do it. So I did it, and I became a Toastmaster, stayed with them, actually worked into some regional leadership with Toastmasters. Loved the experience, and it was a great place. If you're just starting out and speaking, it's a great place, not just to learn how to speak and to do it appropriately, but also to try out your ideas. Because, I actually did Why Kids Misbehave as a speech. You have an 8 minute or 6 to 8 minute speech. I did a 6 to 8 minute speech on Why Kids Misbehave. That's when I went, okay, this is resonating. People find this interesting. And, the rest is history.
I've done the same. I've written a book, but I didn't publish it because I was kind of advised I'm exposing too much. But what I did is I put each chapter and I done a speech on it just to see how people interacted, their level of knowledge on the subject. It's a great place to do it. And plus, if you're starting off, people you get great friends, and international as well. You connect with people that, you don't get into it for that, but you find that I'm constantly in contact with people from a few different clubs that I was involved in. And it's a fantastic, to get that out of it.
Yeah. Well, if you haven't noticed, Roy is in the dark right now, literally. Of course, if you're listening by audio, you wouldn't know this, but we are in the dark with Roy. The power, evidently a big thunderstorm's rolled through his neck of the woods and the power is off. But anyway, Roy, you're still there though, aren't you?
I am indeed. And thankfully, like I've got a backup internet that I can use with a power pack, and I have the laptop, so that hence why we can still stay connected after being disconnected. But yeah, sure. I mean, we discussed a lot of things, but there was one that I wanted, because I had written it down, is a high school champion speaker for forensic team. I was curious. I was like, what's that about? So you might tell me.
Wow. Yeah. Now you're really going back. This was my first foray into public speaking, you might say. You know, I did speeches in high school. Every now and then you had a class where you had to give a presentation or a speech and something like that. But I had a teacher who she saw me. I got involved a little bit with drama in my junior year of high school, but this I think this even predates that. I had a English teacher who said, you know, I'd like you to consider joining the speech team. And I remember going, no, no, I don't think so. I played football at that point. I wanted to be a football star. And she said, no, I think you'd be good. You've got personality, and I think you've got a good head on your shoulder. And she just basically buttered me up. So I said yes. And I said, well, what area? Speaking in Montana speech forensic competitions, they're kind of like track and field meets. If you understand track and field, there was speech and drama, and there were different events, and you competed in a particular event. So, you know, some people do the shot put, some people do the high jump. Well, in speech, you have everything from extemporaneous speaking to impromptu speaking to debate. Well, she gave me memorized public address. And that sounds really odd, but what it was 10 minutes of a speech. 5 minutes of it was an actual speech of a famous person, somebody or somebody that's out there that's fairly well known. And then 5 minutes of the speech was your commentary on the speech, your introduction of the speech, your explanation of what the speech is about. And so it had to be well written, and then the speech had to be delivered very well done. And it was like, wow, okay. So I thought, well, what am I going to do for a speech? And here's the whole thing. This is a 10-minute speech that is word for word memorized. That's why they call it memorized public address. And when you went in, you gave your speech, both the actual speech you're going to give of the famous person, as well as your commentary, all 10 minutes of the speech. It was several pages long. You gave it to one of the judges who literally judged how well you did in hitting your mark on every one of those words in that memorized public address. And that's what I did. And the speech that I was given, she thought I'd be good at, and I never thought about it. I was a church kid, so kind of keep that in mind, but maybe she thought this would be good. But there's an old 17th century or 18th century preacher by name of Jonathan Edwards, who had a famous sermon called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. That was the sermon. And she had me do that speech, you know, and it was, I kind of liked it as a theater guy. I kind of liked it because I could kind of act and be kind of a fiery type of preacher there. It wasn't, you know, I wasn't even thinking about that as a career at any point, but in doing it, it became part of my personality. I mean, I became Jonathan Edwards by the end of that particular speech year. And the funny thing about it was I had never done this. A lot of people do speaking competitions in high school, and they do all 4 years of speaking, and they never make it to divisionals. And you have to get past divisionals to get to state, and they never get even to past divisionals. They get there, and that's pretty much where it ends. But I did fairly well with this speech, and I had some moments. In fact, the very first time I took it to competition, which was a very large competition in Billings, Montana, I actually placed. And to place the first time you ever, I mean, that was like major news among our speech team. I didn't, but I was constantly getting second, third, fourth, fifth at these speech meets all season long. I go to divisionals and I nail it by that point. I nailed it and I got first place at divisionals, got my gold medal. Excellent. And that gave me an automatic berth to state. And at state, I took fifth at state. And that was like, wow, and that's when I realized, you know what, maybe there's something here for me to think about. The end of the story, though, that's interesting is the very next year, my senior year of high school, I came back in with memorized public address, and I did a couple speech meets, and I had a different address. I think I was doing Chief Joseph's, the Indian Chief Joseph's, I will fight no more forever speech or something like that he gave. And it just wasn't going anywhere. I mean, I was placing, but I wasn't placing high enough to my satisfaction. And I had set a goal that year that I wanted to do better than 5th at state, which is a pretty high goal when you think about it. Okay. So it just wasn't going anywhere. I was in drama class. I kid you not, Roy. I was in drama class and I was doing pantomime, which is totally, again, outside my whole area. And I did a baseball pantomime to Casey at the bat. And it just worked. It worked. And my drama teacher said, you ought to take that to our next meet. And I said, you want me to go from speech to drama? That's like going from track to field. Nobody does that type of thing. She says, well, just try it out. So I went to my speech teacher, who was wanting me to just do a different speech and find my legs there in the competition. And I told her, I said, I'm going to switch to drama next week. And she was not happy. She was actually very ticked off at me. But I said, I just got to try it. I mean, it's just going to be fun. I'm going to try it. Well, I went to that drama meet with that Casey at the bat pantomime, and I took first place with it. And my drama teacher was ecstatic. My speech teacher was horrified. It was like, whoa, not good. But I literally switched over to drama my senior year and did competitive pantomime. And I finished, I think I took, as I recall, 3rd at divisionals, which gave me the right to go to state. And then I took 4th at state in pantomime. So I did beat my previous year. So I took a 1st and a 3rd at divisionals, 2 different years. And I took 1st and 5th at state 2 different years in 2 different categories. And I think to this day, I'm the only person, at least in my high school, but it could be even in the state of Montana. It's very rare for someone to place at state in both drama and speech. And I did it. So we'll,
excellent.
I don't know. I'll give that credit to God there. He just, and maybe a little bit of insanity on my part to try something, but that's a good thing for your listeners to cue in on. Don't quit. If something's not working, keep exploring the options, and don't be afraid of options that put a little fear in your heart, or in the fear of others. And by the way, not just fear, but criticism. When I moved over to drama that year from speech, I got a lot of criticism because everybody looked at me as a speaker. I was doing pantomime. I wasn't even going to speak a word the rest of the season in my competitions. And it worked.
Excellent. No, brilliant. Yeah, good motivation, and it's really good to achieve that. And I must say, I've never had somebody with Pac-Man in the back. That was something I used to love when I was younger. So you've got your arcade machine in the background. Brilliant.
Yes, welcome to my studio.
No, fantastic. Listen, it's been fantastic. And look, as you mentioned, we have to get you back again because I did a load of stuff here. But, with my power outages and everything, we're probably close to 45 minutes or whatever. So we definitely need to get you back and, talk. But how can people get in contact with you, Rick?
Well, I'd love to have you reach out to me if you're interested in the book GenTech or anything related to having me come speak on GenTech. RickChromey.com, RickChromey, RickChromey.com will get you there. And from that point, we can chat.
Brilliant. Okay. Thanks very much, Rick.
Oh, look me up. I'm also on Facebook. I'm also at Twitter and YouTube and all sorts of other places.
Yeah, sure. I have a lot of the links anyway. I'll make sure I'll put them on the podcast description as well as the videos.
Thank you.
So that's all for the Speaking Podcast. You'll find all our episodes on speakingpodcast.com or on YouTube. We're on BitChute. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, share with your friends. Until next week, take care.